Welcome to RJ Julia. Thank you for coming to the event tonight. I'm Michael, a book event host and a snowboarder. It's not frequent that those two things like overlap. I ride a Nitro Pantera, 162 centimeters, traditional camber. That's probably not important. That's not why we're all here tonight to meet world champion, Olympic gold medal winning snowboarder, surfer, dog lover, Connecticut native, Lindsey Jacobellis. Hey, Kristen. Lindsey is a five-time Olympian, two-time Olympic gold medalist, World Cup winner, X Games champion. She's won basically every competition they can come up with. She's a mentor for Supergirl Snow Pro organization. She's already a legend in the sport of snowboard cross and still continuing to write her stories. And speaking of writing her story, her book, Unforgiving, Lessons from the Fall, was released earlier this week, tells Lindsey's story of unending, uncompromising determination to push herself, to prove herself, and to power through every obstacle in her path. It's out now. We hope you'll purchase a copy here tonight, and Lindsey will be signing those books afterward. I assume you'll tell us quite a bit about the book, right? Yeah, well, we'll save the rest of that. I personally loved reading a lot about the weekend trips with her family when she was younger. Kind of went all over Vermont and the New England area. It was particularly touching some of the stories about following her brother around the mountain, your experiences with Stratton Mountain School. And there was also, of course, like a detailed look at what it's like to compete in a sport at the very, very highest level. Particularly for physically demanding extreme sport. Lindsey is in conversation tonight with our good very own Kristen Nelson. And here to tell us more about her book, her life, and maybe her snowboard is Lindsey. Thank you, guys.
Okay, on. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm very happy to be here. It's been such an incredible last few days. And so now I feel like I'm on a migration back to my home in Roxbury. This was just such a great little stop to finish out my beautiful goose flying home from the place. So to Michael's point about snowboards, let me ease you in here with a question, which is it's a two-parter. What was the favorite name of a snowboard that you've had so far? And do you still name them? And if so, what's the current snowboard's name? And we've had like Vivian Lee, we've had some very lovely ladies in the mix. I don't currently name my snowboards anymore because I would be really upset if I broke one of them, and then that was a strong time. I'm like, I broke Vivian, so I couldn't do that anymore. But there was that time that I was just trying to call upon that strength of these ladies that have done incredible things within that industry, and I wanted to have that credit kind of portrayed in the snowboarding world as well, because I was in such a male-dominated sport, and the guys would, make their jokes and they're like, well, I have talk ladies, but I have the classy, ladies of a different era that came way before snowboarding, and you. Now, tell me more about what it's like to be a part of a sport that is younger than, in fact, we are, right? Like, just incredibly young. But what is it like to sort of experience a sport kind of as it comes into its own on the professional side? That was pretty unique to be growing as the sport was developing and growing up with the sport, and the technology is constantly changing. New saddle cuts, new construction of snowboards and bindings and boots, they're all changing, and you're going to see that, for the better. And that was nice because it helps you push yourself to new limits and really challenge yourself as a competitor and a rider and an athlete. So that was pretty interesting. And it gave me this unique opportunity to be introduced into certain competitions at certain times. So it's so hard to say if you were doing that same path 10 years later, if those certain situations would line up. Trying to become an Olympic athlete on any, or on any stage, there's no true blueprint to follow, and it's either going to happen or it's not, and it's certain things that line up and some things don't, and it's wild that, you know, my parents gave me this opportunity to follow my dream, and it just somehow landed me there. I mean, the joke in our family is I was either going to be in the Olympics or in the circus. So I was just a wild child. I was trying to keep up with my brother Ben, and always just constantly scraping money, getting hurt, but still powering through. And a lot of my cousins, if Lindsay's coming over, they have to brace themselves for my visit because they just never knew what I needed to do.
Well, we were talking about, what's gonna come next, after this, and I think the circus is a pretty solid contender,
You know, I love animals, so that seems like a great natural transition.
Yeah, no, a little circus delay moment,
Yeah,
I'm into that.
I could be training all the dogs, and so I'd be rescuing all the dogs everywhere, and I just have a whole.
And you just have a dog circus.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. So on the topic of, being with family and sort of the evolution of the sport, you talk in the beginning of this book about, the Stratton community, and sort of comparing and contrasting that with the communities that you've been a part of up to, sort of the pandemic quarantine of the 2022 Olympics, and how strange that sort of felt to be not with the group that you had sort of become accustomed to. From the Stratton community that kind of helped you rebuild after the fire to the parents who formed a circle around yours when Benny took his awful fall that day. Can you talk to me more about the role that community plays in the sport?
I mean, community is huge, and I always reflect back on the phrase, it takes a village, and it really does take a village to help an athlete achieve their dreams. The support that we got from the Stratton Mountain community, I mean, we lost so much. We lost photographs that we still, couldn't get back, and they went into their database and looked up so many years of photos and gave us back everything that they still had backlogged, which was wonderful, because those are the things when you start realizing after the house burns down, it hits you in different ways of like what you've actually lost, what you cannot get back. And that was probably the saddest for especially my family to not have some of those memories of me first on skis. But we were able to find my snowboarding first time on the hill with my brother, which was, it felt special enough that we were able to at least get that back. So community is incredible, and especially when I've had my times of doubt and I've had frustrations or setbacks with injury, it was always nice to have my friends and to have people to really lean on, so I could make it through those hard times. And it's really important. It's important to know when you need to ask for those wins. It's truly amazing that I've been able to go all around the world and feel like I have little villages everywhere and have community through all the most fun.
So one of the things that I was thinking about when we were talking about Ben earlier as well, and about a month ago, we had an author here who had a collection of stories called Fast Fallen Women, and it was about the ways in which women fall and the ways in which they pick themselves back up again. So this is like a very full circle moment for me tonight. I was just like, oh my God, she should have reached out to you. This editor should absolutely have had a piece that was talking about your experience. So much of what you talk about in terms of your successes has been in terms of limit pushing. And so much of what you talk about in terms of failure has been about limit pushing. And so much of what you talk about in terms of your brother is about limit pushing. What have you learned throughout the sum total of your experiences about the nuances of limits and when to push them and how to do that?
I mean, I'm still having to be very conscious of how hard I'm pushing myself, because there's moments still that the competitor button just turns on and I don't have fear, and I try to just I just go for it. So I try to remember, hey, I'm not as easy. When you break a bone, it hurts, and let's remember consequences. And I still have those moments because I still can get lost in joy and the excitement. So, pushing myself, finding those limits, they're important because it challenges me as an individual. And I especially want to force myself to try something if I am actually, hesitant or fearful. It's kind of like, a karaoke bar. It's not something I do, but why not get up and start doing something? Why not force myself? Because I don't want to just shy away and be like, no, I'm too afraid to do it. It means nothing, but as soon as I feel like I'm slightly fearful or nervous, then it's like, well, that's even more reason to push through and make myself do it. So it still backfires times. But I'm injury free right now, feeling pretty good. I still have some, I got some metal in my body. I'm slightly bionic, but it's been quite a journey to see that, because it's been kind of my makeup throughout my entire existence. And I have a lot of those early stories of me going young, wild, jumping on the bed or swinging off of the pull-up bar. It's not what its intended use is for. And part of that is like growing up wild in Roxbury with an older brother that you're just trying to keep up with. So I
It's in Sherland's Roxbury.
yes.
So that sort of energy brings me to the quote that I want to read, which I think just really sort of, it captured for me as someone who does not snowboard, sort of the energy that it kind of takes and the sort of spirit that guides the whole enterprise. So it's on page 19 for those of you reading along. You write, so many wild things can happen on the border cross course, in training or racing. You can know when you stand in one beat and have no idea the next. I see this now with perspective, but as a younger rider, it wasn't so clear. The dots weren't always connecting for me. Sometimes they were, and sometimes they weren't. But in the beginning, I felt like I spent too much time thinking about the fact that there were other people on the course with me, doing their damnedest to connect their own dots. Our sport is all about how the stars are aligning on a given day. What our wax is doing on the board, what lines are being given as the race unfolds. It's a very dynamic, very fluid thing, kind of like life, I guess. Talk to me about the creative expression that comes with snowboarding, because it seems like it's not, there's technical aspects to it, but there's also very much a creative, sort of free spirit, fun, exploratory thing going on.
I think that's actually what really drew my brother and myself to this sport. We grew up skiing, we had our scheduled, weekends. We were the first people up on the mountain on the first chair, and we would go to the, same couple of lunch spots, but it was always to really get the most out of our weekend. So we had the most runs that we could kind of time the crowd. We're going to go in a little early before lunch because everyone's still on the mountain. And we'll have lunch when everyone's in lunch. That's when we're going back out. And then it was always a tactful, experience. And I think that always just transitioned naturally with however I was kind of walking through life, just finding the fastest way through the grocery store. You're picking, you're like, I'm only going into these one things, and I see the lines along here, like with everything. My life has become a border cross, and I'm trying to always be as efficient and purposeful as possible. So moving with purpose and moving with strength is something that I strive for every day, and being able to enjoy everything around you in that moment is what I've learned as I've become a little older. Because when you're young, it was just, at the end of the race, like you're just trying to get to the finish line. But now you can be efficient, but be enjoying what's happening around you as well.
And there was a lot of this in here that, despite being a border cross, not a snowboarder, I was figuring out ways to apply. I did, in fact, call to have our fireplace serviced immediately. Upon reading that chapter, I was like, oh my gosh, you're so right. Just so sage in so many ways. Now, to that point, also, as I was reading this, as someone who is inclined to wake up at 4 a.m. and mull over something potentially stupid I might have said 10 to 15 years ago. Hearing you try to grapple with both the external judgment and internal judgment, and that ongoing process, and it's still ongoing, from your experiences, is something that really resonated with me and sort of made me feel like we're all doing this in some way. This is, no matter how, who could be more impressive, in this situation. And this is still how you're feeling. There was a story about Neil Gaiman, who was at this prestigious party with all of these fancy people, and he was like, oh my God, I was having a little bit of imposter syndrome. And I was talking with this gentleman who had the same first name as me, and we were chatting back and forth. And at one point, he turned to me and said, all of these people have done so many things. I don't really know why I'm here tonight. And he was like, Neil, because you walked on the moon. And then he writes that he sort of had this realization where I was like, if Neil Armstrong is sitting in this room of people feeling imposter syndrome, like maybe there are no grown-ups, like maybe there are just people who are just pretending until until something presents itself. And so I thought about that as I was reading this, and I sort of wanted to ask, in terms of, two-part question again, in terms of taking hold of this narrative in a way that you really haven't been able to in the past, what is something that you would like people to take away about you as they read this story? And then what is something that you think they might take away for themselves?
Well, the last question, that was the whole reason I wanted to share my perspective and what my experience being a professional athlete over 20 years. But mistakes are inevitable, and you have to figure out how to work through them. And I needed, as hard as it was to write some of these chapters in this book, I knew it would benefit, and it has to at least benefit one person. I hope it touches and inspires many people, but I feel like if we can just talk to one person, then that's a win for me. I had so many challenging moments with getting through my Torino Olympic experience and getting through injuries. I just needed to share what actually goes into being an athlete and those ups and downs and struggle. So anyone reading this book, I wanted to just share that, a lot of the times we can be more so unforgiving to ourselves. And I didn't realize how hard I was being on myself, because I was also getting a lot of that unforgiving energy from the media. So that was what I was trying to fend off and understand and learn how to deal with first. But then it really wasn't until 2016 that I realized that this was an avenue I hadn't really explored. I've been physically preparing for these moments every Olympic cycle, but I've never actually done the mental work. And so it's like, why not explore that? So I hope my story inspires and gives that hope for someone to never give up on themselves and to keep growing and keep trying to be their best version of themselves, no matter what walk of life they're on. So you reached one person at least, so you're mission accomplished. We're gonna get more tonight. To pivot a little bit, do you find that there are skills? So this is not your only book, and we'll talk about the other one in a moment, but are there any skills for you as an athlete that translated as an author? Was this just like a completely different bag of cats? Actually, I thought it was really relevant to border cross and how I break down a course for the very first time. I was very overwhelmed during this process a lot, because this is a whole new game for me. I would do very little of the literary world, feeling a little silly sometimes asking HarperCollins certain questions. I'm like, I want to know this question, but I'm more nervous to ask this question, but I just have to do it. But at the top of the board cross course, the very first time, it can be very intimidating. You don't know the speed, you haven't seen anyone run it, you're just seeing all of these features in front of you, and you have to figure out how you're going to be linking them together. And like in border cross, and how I started to approach writing this book was one feature at a time. and inspecting it and breaking it down and then linking it all together. So when I was looking at this as a whole, it was a little too much, and I'm like, I can't do this. Like, you want me to write a book about it? It was hard enough writing the children's book. So this was my mantra that I was working through, and this turned out to be key success. So Watercross has set me up for success in other ways, just like being a competitor racing on it. It has definitely helped me break down challenging scenarios, working through them, and then linking it together to have it do fluid and fun.
This is all gonna work out so great at the Jacobellis circus. So now we're gonna pivot, as a huge animal lover. Obviously there are, some shout outs in this book, and I promise no tears tonight, so we won't mention any particular ones, but I do want to talk about, just the role that animals in general have had, in your life, and then also tell me about Sochi and, the other book that you have written.
So we've always been a dog family. We have always been taught how to take care of our animals and what they need. I always wanted a horse, but it was a little expensive. So we did not have horses. I got to do stable rides and do those kind of things for my birthday, but we have always been households for dogs, and they've always been the extension of our family. And here has those, you definitely know, and it's not far, like they're our children. And when I was in the Sochi Olympics in 2014, it was definitely another challenging time. I just missed out on even getting into finals. And throughout those preceding days, I had befriended this little puppy, and I was looking into the possibility of how I was bringing him home. And especially not doing well there, I was like, well, I'm getting out of here. You're coming with me. I'm not leaving you here. He had given me so much in that moment. Like every time the Olympics would come around, it was very stressful. I knew the narrative. I knew the questions they were going to be asking. We would just be berated by the media, and it would just not really stop. So every time coming off of training or time trials and then like race day, being able to come up and just yell to my puppy. He didn't have a name quite yet, but he knew my voice, and I'd been walking with him and giving him fresh water. And right then and there, we just had this connection. So I knew I couldn't leave him behind, and he had given me so much I couldn't have just taken from him and then left him behind. So I told my parents on the phone, I was like, so what do you think about me bringing home a dog? And they're like, oh, well, I guess we'll figure it out. And so I would still be traveling a ton. So she would be staying at Camp Roxbury. And yeah, we got along great with my mom's dog and Gidget, and it worked. And then I felt he was a little commandeered, and I was not able to take him to California because I felt so much about it. So she's still alive and well and healthy in Roxbury. And that was what gave me the inspiration to write the children's book. Happened during the pandemic. And I wrote that story back in 2014, but then didn't really revisit it until we were all locked in our homes. And we're like, what are we gonna do? And gyms are open, and we have nothing to do. And it's like, well, I kind of put this on the back burner for a while. Let's see if I can, research and figure out what's happening in this space to see if I could make something happen or something come from it. So it was quite the experience. I had to do a lot of research and get the copyright. So I was just doing my own thing on it, and it was really funny how I even found the illustrators that brought the image of Sochi to life, and how we had to share all the photos and kind of give more background detail so they can make their, children illustrations just so colorful and expressive and wonderful every time you put it.
And on the topic of children, I know that there are some budding athletes in the audience, some who have already experienced their first broken bones.
It's part of it.
For those who are kind of just getting into the foray, or taking their first trips down the slope, what are your words of wisdom for I don't know, God, I don't want to say it, the next generation of athletes? Sorry.
Yeah. I would just say, you know, enjoy the moment that you're experiencing with your friends and your family. And, you know, nothing lasts forever. Everything changes a little bit and you're growing up and you're constantly changing. So take in those moments. It's so hard to understand them for that young generation, but you're with me, keep saying it, but I'm probably sounding like my parents, so they're probably not listening to it. So it's just going to be what it's going to be. You'll have more pictures because everything has a phone now, so you'll be able to remember it later on in life.
And then, I guess, well, I have a lot of questions, but the last one before I turn it over to the audience is when you think back over the last 10 or 15 years, there are a lot of hard moments in this book, but there are also a lot of really great moments and really, you know, triumphant moments. What have been sort of your greatest joys?
I mean, I have a lot of joyful moments outside of sport, and yes, Gidget is one of them. Gidget was my previous dog that, you know, 17 years, she graced me with her presence, and she was through every Olympic cycle, and I was very happy that she made it through the last one. It was definitely very, very hard for me to have to say goodbye to her, but I was home for it, which was always risky with how much I travel, so I was very happy that I was able to do that. But I also have you know, amazing family, and my brother now has 2 kids. So I am now excited to share that energy and excitement with any sort of outdoor activity or finger painting, you know, or just backyard goofy game that they come up with. Are they on the slopes yet? I have been on the slopes with Chloe. She's 5. She was on skis, and I usually ski with her just because it's a little bit easier to run with her. It's a little safer and they're out of harm's way. And then it's also easier to be teaching her if she can see what I'm doing. And it's springtime, so it's when I get to go up to the mountains and be with her. The snow is softer, so it's a break for me from snowboarding, and it makes me appreciate the mountain in a different extent.
That's too cute. Okay, I'm gonna end on a little image of you like skiing down the slopes with a 5-year-old, because that's what we're here for. Let me at this point open it up to some audience questions. If anybody has any questions for Lindsey they would like to ask.
Question, yeah, things started. When you have downtime, you've done training, you're home, whatever, you try to stay focused all the time, or take advantage of the times when you don't have to be focused on swimming, competing, like what's your strategy?
I wouldn't say I might not be specific in what I'm focused on, but I'm always involved in a task. So when I was living in Roxbury still, my parents have a brand new stone wall because of it. I just decided one summer this was going to be.
She's amazing, ladies and gentlemen.
I knew nothing of the Mason world, but I was like, you know what? Everyone's redoing their stone walls in Roxbury. Ours have been here. I don't need any material. I'll just reshape it and hopefully not get poison ivy. But I love doing DIYs, and there's certain things that help me escape because I have to be so focused on that task. But then there's certain activities or exercises that I'll do that will help me break down and focus more if I need a little bit more intensity or more focus in whatever I'm doing. But off season is usually based around getting back into conditioning, strength training, and as we build into the fall, I'll do more power, endurance, and high velocity training. So just like to have that downtime in between because it's very, very tiring to be on the road. And you know, the first like week I'm home, it's like I'm binge watching a series. Spring cleaning, I'm deep cleaning everything and going through all the mail. And once that's done, then I can start having fun and catching up on life.
Having the sort of downtime that is building a stone wall. Who else has a question?
Let's talk about this. So there's a difference at 14 when you are at that rate of going from a great athlete to ultra competitive. And then when I'm high school and doing friends, there becomes that tension. And that insecurity that can happen because of fears. When you're being that smart, quiet person that dials in. How do you get past it?
My mom's favorite show is Survivor, so she can do how to, but that is a very challenging situation. I grew up with all of my friends, and we did all of it. We started t-ball, and we're little, and we're in softball, and then we're lacrosse or field hockey, or it could be trying out for a musical, and so you're kind of always going against the same 10, 15 people, and you're kind of always changing it up, and that is hard, and it can challenge friendships. And it's okay if those friendships step away for a few. But Emma is one of my longest friends, and she is in my book. And we had moments like that, but then eventually our lives brought us in the direction of our own, passions. That you look back on that and remembering who won a state championship or who was the lead role in the play is not the most important thing. And finding the commonality and strength within your bond, I think, is more important. And to maybe taking out that competitive element every now and then, that you're doing something creative and enjoying each other's company. Because it is wonderful when you do have those friendships that have lasted so long. And Emma lives in Rhode Island now, and I don't get to see her all that much, and she has 2 kids, but if we do get to see each other, it's like no time has passed. We've picked up right where we left off, and that's a wonderful memory and friendship that I cherish so much. So I can totally understand that struggle and that challenge in that middle school, high school. You couldn't pay me to do middle school then. There's not a dollar amount available to do that. So it will get better.
Anybody who enjoyed middle school, I don't trust a little bit,
Yeah.
I don't know. You didn't struggle enough as a person for you to really have built the character that's necessary. And you talk about that too, in the book as well, about and it was Emma who sort of kept you in the loop, because there's a certain subset of the audience that will remember AIM and AOL Instant Messenger and things like that, and sort of keeping in touch via things like that. But I think that you speak a lot about how it does change if you are going at that hyper competitive level, but the people who truly love you will it will be different than you maybe anticipated it was going to be, but there will be people who will keep you in the loop and will keep you connected.
Absolutely. And I love that I have Emma is one of my cherished friends, and then you also learn how to create these other bonds and other women, find these strengths, and then they bring a little bit of their world and their strengths into you, and then you just have like a memorable base to those more experiences on your own side.
What email activity did you look at before you were growing up?
I would say my parents would always yell when People Blue Street was on. We loved the name, and we were into skiing, and that was when I was kind of first starting to tune into the Olympics and what that stage looks like. And they're like, yeah, they walk in and it's dressed the same, it's a big parade, and they represent their country, and like, who knows, we could do this someday. Like, we're not taking this forward. It was never a planned thing. It's, again, she was already signing up in the survey.
It's not like it wasn't a planned thing. Excuse me for 1 minute. Hang on. Okay. I don't know how well you all can see this, but this little practice standing up on the Olympic podium, this is not an unplanned situation, ladies and gentlemen.
This was a birthday party in Andrew Chin's house. They're down by the Roxbury Pond, right, in that zone. And he would always have the crazy like slip and slides or the cool gyms. Those were certain things that were not allowed in my house, not for an injury standpoint, but it would hurt the grass. Because we would just keep sliding and just like fair spot. So that was like a one and done scenario at our house. So that was something we reserved for the birthday parties, but that was an Olympic themed birthday party because the Olympics were coming around and around Andrew's birthday. So they made up all these different kind of games, and the parents made these like little medals and they handed them out. So like every kid got a medal. It was, I do vividly remember what the medal was, and it was like kind of a cardboard, but it just had like the glitter, rings and everything. So it was very detailed. But I don't really remember standing on that little podium under the flag. But as soon as I was telling people that I was doing my book, and I ran into Bill Chin, who was like, I have the perfect photo that needs to go in your book. And I was like, perfect, awesome.
Yeah, it really sets the tone, really makes it look really casual. You know, how did you do the Olympics? Who could tell?
Sort of a flip side to the other questions I would ask, but there's just so much pressure on children's sports these days. And how did you remember this? And there's some great quotes like by Michael Jordan about how many free throws he's ever missed. How did you find your stride there and pushing yourself, but knowing that you're not going to win every single place? Like, did it evolve over time, or was there some non-direct things with that? What advice would you give?
That's a good question, because I didn't learn my stride in that reality for my mental side and that approach until a little bit later, because I was such an aggressive, driven, competitive athlete, especially when I was in border crossing, with a lot than winning anything. It's how I could identify my self-worth. So it took me a long time to rewrite the narrative in my mind, telling myself that I have the ability to win every time. It's just not feasible and it cannot happen. And that's a little almost ridiculous that I could be thinking that. But when I was really little, my parents never really pushed me in anything. We just did all the seasonal sports. I was not just thrown into that one, like we are seeing so many kids being put into sports so much earlier, because the level is always increasing, but then it seems like the age to entry is always going lower and lower, and that's so hard. And I don't know if that was just my timing and what, my parents never wanted me to just pick one thing. I think they just wanted me in activity because I just had a lot of energy, and it made sense to like, this is the season, we gotta put it in this, otherwise you're crazy. So I would just say, just have that open communication with the coach and your kid to make sure that, that's what they are enjoying. And when I have done mentoring with the 11, 12-year-old age with surfing or snowboarding, it was more about educating the parents on what to expect. And I have moments where they be almost frustrated. He's just not listening, or he doesn't know that we want him to try harder. And I'm like, well, you are introducing him to sport, and you are trying to train him to become a professional athlete. He's not a professional athlete. And then hearing that, I think that switched their mindset and understanding of what they could expect. And I was like, do you remember being 12 years old? Do you remember you were efficient? And then they're like, oh, okay. So then getting that dialogue and that communication with the coach and looping in that those were some of the things that they were frustrated on, it could just help the athlete really feel comfortable in the situation. So he could raise up any concerns or things that he's struggling with, because, well, you're going to be struggling with things. It's just, you're figuring out, you're developing into a new body, and there's so many things that is that are changing in your life at that time. But introducing the possibility of like, oh, you're just going to be a professional athlete, that's a hard thing to swallow. So finding that balance, and I know that's such a cliche thing to say, but it's taken me years. So you can't expect a young athlete to be sharing that all of a sudden.
I'm jumping the line to ask. A question sort of jumping off of that though, which is, in terms of you write in this book about when it was, you took a day off, right? Like before a big competition and took maybe even 2 days off where your coaches were kind of like, you know, they wanted you out on the courses, they wanted you practicing more. And you're like, my body is tired. I need to take a break. And you won that race. And sort of realize like, oh, listening to myself is sort of a valuable commodity that I feel like we don't, when we're young, when we're women, when we're human in general, like sometimes we just don't necessarily know how to do that. And in particularly when we're kids and we don't necessarily have that voice yet, or we don't necessarily feel empowered in that way, what kind of advice would you give for a young athlete in terms of empowering themselves or advocating for themselves?
I would just be open to sharing how you feel with your coaches and your parents, and that parents shouldn't be pushing themselves or their kids into something that they're not in love with, because I believe that fire will be found within, and when that child wants to really pick that direction and strives for greatness, they'll do it in a given pace.
It's a good answer. Okay, I jumped. Anybody, we have time for maybe one more question?
Maybe one.
Maybe one more?
I'm always surprised when I read about like champion athletes, either Olympians or like NBA MVPs who take their medals or trophies and then toss them in their closet. And as a weekend warrior, I've been dreaming about these things and that. It's like prominently to see. So I'm just curious where your medals are at your parents' house. Do you have them? Or they just toss them in the bed or closets?
Well, all of my X Games medals are in my parents' safety deposit box because we are a little bit nervous of a fire situation. We have a little PTSD. We were a little nervous on that. And I was always traveling so much, and it was a little just nerve-wracking to have them just kind of sit around, and I was not really sure when I would be done, and we were always deciding, you know, maybe when you're done with those games, you're done competing, we'll figure out a way to display them, but I just haven't stopped yet, so that was part of another another side of that. My parents have a lot of my trophies at their house in Roxbury, and we have some in Vermont, maybe in stores somewhere. But my more recent medals, and those are I forgot them.
We won't tell them. Well, I think all that remains for me to do is to remind everybody that Lindsey Jacobellis' new book, Unforgiving, is here. It's awesome. You should buy it, and you should buy it at an independent bookstore. With that, I want to encourage everybody to thank once again Lindsey for joining us tonight.
Being here and making where all started. And Anita, thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad.